Hello, my crafty friends. Well, today I have a fun little technique that I want to share with you. We are going to be doing some ink embossing, and I have two different ways you can use this technique in your card making. Hi, it's Lynn Dunn from Stamptastic Designs. Thanks so much for joining me today. In this episode of Stamptastic TV, I have two different card ideas to share with you that feature an ink embossing technique. So we are going to use some ink and an embossing folder, and we're going to use it in two different ways to create two different backgrounds for our cards. Now, the cards in this video feature the delightful Doilies dies from Stampin Up. So this particular die set features an embossing folder, and it also features some doily dies. So the cool thing about this particular type of die set is that we can emboss and we can die cut at the same time. Now, I'm not going to show you that particular technique. I'm going to save that for a different video. But for this video, we are going to use the embossing folder that is in this particular set. And this is the embossing folder that I use to create the background on these cards. Now, keep in mind, you can use any embossing folder that you have on hand, and you can use any ink colors with this particular technique. I will also be using the Lasting Joy stamp set. So this stamp set has a variety of fun florals in it, which coordinate with the Countryside Inn Designer Series paper. And then the last thing, I decided to use a greeting. I need some congratulations cards, so I decided to use a greeting from the Something Fancy stamp set. But you can certainly use the greetings from the Lasting Joy set or from any other set that you have on hand. All right, so let's get started making these cards. Okay, so first let's talk about the colors that I'm using for the cards that I'm sharing today. So I am using some Night of Navy and Boho Blue. So Boho Blue is one of the new in colors, and this is the ink color that we are going to use for our embossing technique. So let's start out by talking about the embossing folder. So you can use any embossing folder that you have on hand. You do not have to have this particular folder. So what you will notice is that there is a top and a bottom. So you have the same design on the top as you do the bottom. So one of the designs pushes the design outward, the other pushes the design inward, and that's what gives you your embossed look on your cards. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how it looks to use this technique depending on which side of the embossing folder that you ink up. So yes, I'm going to be adding some ink to each side of this embossing folder, and you're going to see the different look that you get depending on which side that you use. So I'm just going to start with the Boho Blue here, and I'm going to call it top and bottom. So you'll be able to tell the top of the embossing folder is the one with the Stampin' Up logo on it. And then, of course, the bottom is this one without the Stampin' Up logo. So we are going to add some ink to the top first, the one with the logo on it. So just take your ink pad and just lightly tap it across the embossing folder, because you want to pick up on the raised areas of this folder. So we want to get ink on those different areas. And so just kind of lightly tap it, and you can see already where the ink is going. And don't worry about your embossing folder. All this ink is washable, so it'll wash right off. I'm actually going to use a baby wipe to wipe it off, but you can definitely run this under water just to get the excess ink off when we're done. So if you get any extra ink on this other part, like I did, just wipe it off, because we only want ink on the one side of the embossing folder. So I am going to add just a little bit more ink right up here on the top. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So if you put your ink on and it gets on all the spaces in between, you can always just wipe it off and start over. But I think this looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is just turn this, and I cut a 3 3/4 by 5-inch piece of white cardstock. So I'm going to lay that on the side that I don't have the ink on. And I'm going to try to line this up in the middle here. And I'm going to use the embossed section on the bottom here to kind of eyeball where the center is. And then I'm just going to take my inked up embossing folder and just push it down onto my white paper so you can see where the ink is. And now I'm going to run this through my embossing machine. So I'm going to take the embossing folder and just lay it on the platform. And I have the Stamp Cut and Emboss machine from Stampin' Up. So there's this plate number 4 that I'm going to use with this embossing folder. And then I'm just going to run it through the machine. And then I can remove my paper. Okay, so you see that that's what the ink does. It goes into those spots. It kind of pushes the ink into the different spots on the cardstock. So this is what it looks like when I ink up the top part of the embossing folder. So now we're going to clean this off and we are going to do the bottom section. So you could just take a baby wipe and just wipe off the ink, because you will get ink all over the embossing folder. So you can just wipe this off, or you can take this to your sink and you can run it under some warm water and just get all the ink off. Okay, so now that we've added the ink to the top, let's try adding it to the bottom part of the embossing folder, and then you can see just how different the look is. So I'm just going to go ahead and tap this all around on this part of the embossing folder. So remember, I did this side for the first one. Okay, so I have the ink added to the bottom part of this embossing folder. So this does take a little bit of practice, so don't get discouraged if you put the ink on and you feel like you put it on too hard. It does take a little bit of practice, just kind of using that light touch to add the ink to the embossing folder, because if you press too hard, you're going to have ink in spots that you don't want it. So you don't want ink on the spots in between, like the doilies here. So I'm just going to push this down. So that's what it looks like. And then we will run this through the embossing machine. So now we can just lift this up, and then this is the embossed look that you get with the inking. So that's what it looks like when you ink up the bottom part of the embossing folder. So I'll bring these both back and show you them side by side. So you can see the look is completely different. So this is what it looks like when I inked the top part of this embossing folder, and this is what it looks like when I inked the bottom. So each part of the embossing folder has different points, different points of pressure. So when you ink up the different parts of the embossing folder, you get a different inking look on, your embossed image. So it's pretty cool. It's a fun technique. I highly recommend that you do this with all of your embossing folders, because you will get some really fun background designs that you can use in your card making. All right, so now that we have these fun background designs created, let's start by creating a card. So let's start with this one, and I'm going to show you a card that I created with this particular background. So we are going to be starting with a piece of boho blue cardstock for the base of the card. And remember, this piece is 3 3/4 by 5 inches. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to mat it out with a little bit of Night of Navy. So I cut a piece of Night of Navy cardstock at 4 by 5 1/4 inches. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just adhere these two pieces together. And then I'm just going to add this to my card front. So like I said, this little technique is super fun. It's simple to do, and it creates such a really pretty background no matter what embossing folder you use. So that's what the card front looks like. Then I just used some of the dies in the set and some of that Countryside Inn Designer Series paper. So I just cut this little die cut piece out from a piece of designer paper. It's the same design that's in the center of this doily. And then I just cut the circle shape out, which is also one of the dies in the set. And basically what I'm going to do is just adhere these two pieces together. And this is going to create the focal point for the front of the card here. So let's add that. And I tried to keep this very simple because I really wanted to just focus on the technique with you versus putting together a very intricate card design. So this one is very simple. You can decorate it however you wish. I just cut a 1/2 inch by 2.5 inch piece of white cardstock, just some scrap white, put some dimensionals behind it. And this we're just gonna pop up on the bottom here of this centerpiece, and that is our focal point. And then I just added a little bit of twine, and then I added some gems. You can see I added a couple little gems here to this particular card. So that's really the ease of this design. I decorated the inside with a little designer paper. So very simple, but just a very beautiful card. And the second card idea features the other background piece that I created. So this is the ink embossing that I did by inking the bottom part of the embossing folder instead of the top of the embossing folder. So it gives you a completely different look. So let's go ahead and make this card. So this card has the same base. So it has the boho blue base. And then this piece is also 3 3/4 by 5. And so I'm adhering it to the same size Night of Navy cardstock. So this one is 4 by 5 1/4. That's the Night of Navy. So they're just a 1/4 inch different in size. And then we will adhere this to the card front. And then what I did is I just cut a piece of designer paper. I just actually cut this strip out. So this designer paper has this particular design all the way across. And I'm just going to adhere this to the bottom of the card front here. So this one I'm making just a little bit more detailed than the last one. So this is a 1 by 3 3/4 inch piece of designer paper. So the next thing I did is I cut a 1/4 inch by 3 3/4 inch piece of Night of Navy cardstock. And I'm putting that across the bottom as well, just to kind of break it up, because it can get pretty busy having all the inked embossing behind there. So I'm just breaking it up a little bit. So the first thing I did is created my greeting. So I have a little 1/2 inch by 2.5 inch piece of white cardstock that I stamped my greeting on. And then I just took a 1/4 inch by 3 inch piece of Night of Navy cardstock, and I'm just putting this behind it just to give it a little bit more contrast, I guess. So that's what I did with my greeting. And then I cut a piece of vellum. So I'm going to put the greeting right here. I cut a piece of vellum from using one of the dies from the set. So it's about a 2 inch circle shape, basically. And this is going to go in the center. And I'm going to put my little florals all around. And basically what I want to do is just kind of figure out where all of these things will be positioned. And then I will adhere them to my greeting, because I found it's a little bit easier to do that. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to add a little bit of glue back here, and I'm going to lay my greeting across here. And then I'm just going to tuck that under a little bit. And then I'm going to grab these. And I'm going to add some dimensionals. So I found that that was just a little bit easier than trying to tuck all these pieces underneath the greeting. So I'm going to add some dimensionals. And then I'll show you why I did this. So we'll lay this little piece right in the center here. And then I already have dimensionals on the back here, so I'm just going to align this onto my vellum, and then I'm going to pick up my vellum. And the cool thing about this is now I know exactly where I can add some glue, because the thing about using vellum is if you add glue in these spots where there is no greeting or flowers, it's going to show right through. So by adding my flowers and everything directly to this piece of vellum, I know exactly how I can adhere this. So isn't that pretty cool? So it was kind of fun. Okay, so we'll stick this down. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just add this little leaf piece right off the side here. And then you can add some gems across this piece like I did here, or you can leave it blank. Either way, it's beautiful either way. And then on the inside, I just added some designer paper and a little 1/4-inch strip of Night of Navy cardstock. Okay, so there you go. Now you have 2 different ways you can use this ink embossing technique in your card making. And if you enjoyed these card ideas, feel free to download the printable tutorial. You can find the link in the description below this video. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by liking it and sharing it with your friends. And leave me a comment below to let me know what you enjoyed most about the video and the cards shared here today. Have a fun and creative day, my friends. Take care.